good morning, everybody. Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another edition of CGS Live, VFX edition. I'm going to be continuing on working with the Kong shot that I've been working on for the last couple of shows. And I think today we'll probably finish it off. Like I said last week, I'm going to be focusing on Nuke mainly today. We'll talk a little bit about what I did for the rendering in Houdini, but we're going to try and focus mainly on compositing today. So I have rendered out all of the different elements. So if anyone has any questions about rendering, then please let me know. So I've rendered everything out. I've rendered out the fire, the dust, the breath. Hey Audrey, how you going? Welcome. Thanks for joining me. I've rendered out the leaves. I rendered out the grit, but actually I think I'm not going to use the grit. The grit at the moment isn't really working, so I think I'll leave that off. I also did some more elements, so just to have a look at what I've already done. Hey Rizwan, how you going? So let's see. I made some changes to the breath simulation, so I actually wanted a breath that I could render instead of one that was just driving the simulation of the leaves. So if you have a look, you can see that the breath that I've got now, compared to what I had a couple of weeks ago, it comes out a lot sooner. That's one thing that I noticed in my previous sim, is that it came out a bit late. So, hey Trash Art, how you going? So this one comes out a bit sooner, so that I can actually use it for rendering. And then it's a lot kind of noisier and fuzzier, because if you look at footage of when people breathe in cold air, for example, you see a lot of sort of break up to the edges. It's not a smooth simulation like the smoke. It's really kind of broken up, and it also dissipates quite quickly. So we've got that, and it's sort of, as it kind of gets lost in here. I think that's just because of the lighting and display. But as he sort of finishes and closes his mouth, this sort of stops emitting. So we end up with this cloud in the air. But I'm only going to use it very subtly in the comp. So we'll see that soon when I bring it in. With the leaves as well, I felt that the leaves were a little bit too many. I had them everywhere. So I've really pared that back, and now I just have a kind of handful of leaves. So we have a look at this layer here, the render leaves is the cache. So you can see, I don't really have all that many at all. If we go in and have a look, we can see probably, I don't know, maybe, I think I start with 3,000 leaves, but then I really cull a lot back. Maybe let's have a look at the points here. Oh, only 100. So there we go. So very few. So we can see that the leaves are kind of, they're a bit more subtle than they used to be. They're just sort of flying around very, very kind of gently, and they're not everywhere all over the set like they were before. So that I think will work a little bit better. The grit I felt was just a little bit too full on. I think it was a bit fast for the shot. So I've decided to not use that one, but we can have a look in the comp and I can show you what I kind of had a look at. And then the dust. I've got this dust sim now, which I think I did a higher resolution simulation of this one over the weekend. And that's working quite nicely. Just a subtle kind of dust element. And then of course we've got our fire, torch fire here. That is working quite well. So I've rendered all these out, and I've rendered them out to separate mantra nodes. So you can see each element has a separate mantra node: the fire, dust, breath, drool, grit, and leaves. And the reason you want to do things like that separately is because when we get into comp, I want to be able to tweak the fire separate to the dust, or maybe the drool needs to be changed, and I don't want to have to fiddle around with maybe drawing a mask just so I can affect that. It's much easier to composite things together. We want Godzilla. Morning, Robert. How you going? I hope you've got your coffee. So we want to be able to affect those things separately in the comp, and I'll show you that when we get into Nuke. So I always, hey Patrick, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is for you. Thanks for joining me. So as much as possible, I always try to render things separately. I may do a test render of everything together just so I can see that everything's working properly, but I always render things separately. It just makes life so much easier in comp. So let's dive into the comp. And the first things I'm going to bring in are the assets that I haven't rendered. So I've got here environment, Kong, and a BG and foreground. So I'm going to drag those in. I'm just going to drag in the entire folder, and it should dump the renders in there. So there's our foreground layer. Here's our background layer. Hopefully that works. There we go. And here's our Kong layer. It's pretty dark, so I'll just raise the viewer gain so I can see them a bit clearer. Hopefully that's brought them in animated. Yes, it has. So our shot goes from 150 to 300. And this is a beautiful render of Kong that we've got to work with. And we're going to add our drool in. But we also need to composite this stuff because these are all just separate layers. So there's our background, there's our foreground. And Kong kind of goes in the middle of these two. So he would go over the background layer. So if I put a merge down just by hitting M in Nuke, then I can do Kong is A, and it's always A over B with the merge operation. So Kong is A over the top of the BG. So there you go, you can see. If I swap these, you can see he ends up going behind the moon, which obviously we don't want. Like that. And then the foreground is going to be A over B on the top of these merged options. So B can go into that. And there we go. So now we've got Kong kind of in the middle of those two layers. Rizwan, you built a land speeder in Lightwave. Good. That's good. Have you ever used Nuke? Or have you ever done any compositing before with your renders? Excuse me while I drink my coffee. It is morning here. So I remember in our old render that we were using as our background that there was a bit of a fog haze on this moon. If you have a look, I think I have it. If I go look through the camera, you can see it here. So I might try and get something like that happening as well in our comp. I'm not sure what the best process for that is, but one thing that I would probably just try first of all is putting down a glow off of the moon. So if I plug that in off to the side, actually I'll plug it in line first and then I'll show you why I might want to do it on the side. So yeah, I can get this very broad glow happening like that. 666, nice. But it's kind of glowing all the rocks as well because the glow has this tolerance. So I just need to take that down and the tolerance will then apply. You can see how at the moment I'm getting glows on all the light parts of the rocks as well, but I only want it on this really bright section. So if I up the tolerance value, you can see that it no longer affects those low luminance areas. I can take it sort of right up, but looks like something like that is kind of okay. What do I mean by compositing? Well, exactly what I'm doing here is compositing. It's sort of layering, kind of like Photoshop, where you layer different images over the top of each other to end up with a composited image. This is compositing, where we take our renders that we might have done in 3D. You know, if you're using Lightwave, then you would take your 3D renders from Lightwave, bring them into a compositing package, and then you can add things like these optical effects and do some tweaks. Like, you know, for instance, if I turn this back down, let's say that I wanted Kong to be brighter. He's quite dark here. If I put a grade node down after Kong, then I can lift him up. Whereas if I didn't use compositing for this, I wouldn't be able to do that, and I would have to go back to 3D and re-render. And in the case of something like, I've been rendering something over the weekend, which was 4K. In fact, it was 4K plus 20% overscan, which made it almost 5K. And my computer's just been rendering non-stop, trying to get that done. So compositing saves me a lot of time if I want to make a little tweak. Like you can see, I just lifting Kong a little bit there with some gamma, just to brighten him up a little bit so he just pops out of the shadows. And if I didn't have this as a separate layer to the background, or if I had the foreground in there as well, I would be affecting, you know, it would be essentially like I was doing this at the end, affecting everything. And I don't want to affect everything. I just want to affect Kong. So that's why we render separately, and that's why we use compositing. Yeah, it's kind of not the same as adding effects in 3D. It's a little bit different. It's a two-dimensional thing, compositing mainly. You can do some 3D stuff in it, but usually it's a two-dimensional thing. So the glow, why I might want to add the glow as a separate thing off to the side. At the moment, you can see when I add the glow, and maybe I've gone a little crazy on the size here, is at the moment it sort of goes behind Kong, because obviously it's on that layer, and then when we put Kong, he goes over the top. Sometimes what can be useful is having the glow off to the side, and in Nuke you have this checkbox called Effect Only. Not sure if you covered this when you started set up the shot, but I wanted to ask about camera tracking with Nuke and compositing effects into Out of Houdini. Sure, I can try and talk a little bit about that. I can't actually do any tracking in this version of Nuke because I'm using the non-commercial one, I think. That's right. But you definitely can do tracking in Nuke, and it's pretty good. You know, it's pretty good for certain types of tracking. If you got a lot of really 3D movement of the camera where it's sort of moving around a lot, that can sometimes be a little tricky to do in Nuke. But for simple tracking jobs, like if it's just a sort of, you know, very slow moving camera through an environment, like a drone shot or something, you can handle that stuff really well. So I can definitely try and talk a little bit about that, but it'll be difficult to demonstrate in this version. So what you can do with a glow in Nuke is turn on Effect Only, and then you just have the glow effect that you could add in maybe after everything's merged together. So I could add it down here, A over B, and it would be a plus, because a glow is kind of like an additive effect, so you don't want to over it because it ends up looking really odd like that. You want to plus it. Do you do any animation? Me personally, I'm not an animator, and I don't really do animation, so I didn't do any of the Kong animation, for example. I do mainly effects and a little bit of compositing, but mainly effects. I would consider myself a generalist, but I don't really do animation because I'm not very good at it. So I try to avoid it. So you can see when I add glow after everything else, then I get it kind of going over the top of Kong, which gives me this kind of nice sort of bloom effect. Maybe I don't want it over the top of him a lot, so I could always just blend that down, or I could plus it on each layer as well, and then control how much of that effect is going on each layer. I like to sometimes layer up glows as well. You have to be careful with glows that you don't go too crazy with them, but I like to kind of do a smaller glow and then a larger glow with less brightness, which kind of gives me this sort of halo type effect. So I'll turn the brightness down on that, and you can see how I've got this brighter core and then sort of a fall off around it. So you get this kind of interesting halo effect. So having a look back here, I've probably gone a bit strong on that, and this one has a bit more fall off, but I'm not gonna worry too much about that at the moment. You can also tint these, so if you have a look at the tint option, you can add some sort of blue tones to it. So the moon is this kind of blue color, so let's just add a little bit of blue to it. There we go, and you can see just plussing a little bit of that at the end there. It just gives me a little bit of optical sort of glow over Kong, but not crazy. I don't want to go really over the top with it. Okay, so that's enough to worry about with the environment for now. Now, I'm going to bring in my effects renders, so I'll just go and navigate to them and drag them in. Render. And first one off the rank is the leaves. So here's, oops, sometimes it hooks up to one of your flags there, so you just need to rehook that up. So here's my leaves pass. If I lift it up, you can see what that looks like. Let me just, sometimes when I just dragged in a single frame and it's only brought in frame 150. So I just need to open up the file opener and, oops, just re-pick the sequence. So 150 to 300. And now I should be able to see that full animation. So there we go, there's my leaves. So let's add those on top. So I'll merge. And it's back to being an over because these are solid geometry. It's not like a light effect like the plus. So this is a A over B merge. And they're kind of hard to see, but they are in there. I don't have a shadow pass for these, so that's potentially something that I would need to render out. But I think, you know, it's because they're quite subtle and there will actually be some dust and stuff on top of these eventually, then it might, you know, it might be fine. I might not need that, but you know, it might be worth having a look at how we set something like that up in Mantra after this. So this is running quite slow because it's full resolution. One thing that you can do in Nuke is actually take the display resolution down, so it sort of only displays 50% resolution. You can see 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 4. If I take that right down, it should become incredibly low resolution. Sometimes that can be a bit faster to display, but it is kind of like downsampling your resolution that you have already. So I don't know, sometimes I find that can help just speed things up a little bit, but you can see it also takes the quality down. So let's have a look, go forward a bit. Playback is not great with these high resolution renders. One thing that we can actually do, which can make things speed up a little bit, is to pre-cache nodes. So if you have a composite like this for the background that you're happy with, then you could potentially write it out to disk. And that can speed certain sections up. So I'll bring everything in first and then we can look at maybe seeing if we can optimize it a little bit. So our leaves, now our drool. So I'll bring the drool in. And if we have a look at that, it'll be a little hard to see. Oh, need to load in the sequence. There it is. Look at that. So this one is probably going to need to go over the top of Kong. So I'm going to make some room here. Like this, and slot that in here. So I'm going to merge that over the top. There we go. So with the drool, the reason why when I sort of drop it in, it sort of just sits in there pretty well and it has all the colors from the mouth in there, is because with, whoops, there's my Houdini. With the drool, what I've got is, thanks. With the drool, what I've got is the Kong asset as a map, which is holding it out. So what that means is that it's going to cut out any parts where the Kong geo is in front of the drool geo. It will cut it out. So when you sit it over the top, it looks like it sits properly on there. But the reason it's got the colors is because my Kong asset has a projection on it. So there it is there. So if or you can see it here in the viewport. So it has the texture projected on it. It has a constant shader with the plate projected onto it. So that is what shows up when you have a refractive object like this drool is. This is a sort of glass shader. So it shows up that texture behind it. And that's why we end up with the correct colors, so that when you sit it on a geometry that has the same colors, it sort of blends in, which makes it work. So let's have a look at that. We might need to make some adjustments to that layer. Let's just go down here. Man, this is yeah, the nuke is taking a little bit to update. I'm sorry about that. But you can see it just sort of, it works pretty well. You can make some adjustments. If you put a grade node down, we could play around with, you know, making it darker, making it lighter. sometimes just adding a little bit of gamma to sort of lift the overall brightness of it can sometimes help with things like spit, just to make it not completely disappear when it goes over like the darkness, for example. So we can play around with all those things, but I think it looks okay. You don't want effects to be sort of too in your face. Effects are always the supporting element, as much as, you know, effects artists would love their effects to be the main focus of the shot. They're usually just the supporting element for the story. So you might, as an effects artist, do a comp that makes your effects look amazing, but sort of takes the focus away from the character. And then when you give it to a compositor, they're going to balance all that stuff out and make your effects sit in properly and be the supporting thing in the shot. So that's just something that you need to come to terms with over time as you're working in VFX. That the effects is not always the main star of the show, unfortunately, as much as we would like it to be. All right, so you'll notice as well that I've spent some time on the drool, the flip drool. It's a little less OTT now. It was a bit over the top last time, and arguably it's still a little bit over the top, but I've tried to just thin it down a lot and have it be a bit more of this kind of dripping effect. And perhaps it's a little bit too much, but I think it kind of looks okay. Possibly I should render the stringy drool and the flip drool as separate layers so that I could choose to turn off the flip drool. That would potentially be something that somebody would ask me to do, so it would be handy to have that as a separate pass. Okay, so there's our drool, and that's sitting in there pretty well. Happy with that. So let's have a look what else we have. So we've got our leaves. Let me bring in something else. We've got leaves, drool, breath. We've got grit as well. The grit, let me just find that. Check which version in here. So that's just grit. And then we also have fire. Just gotta locate the correct version. So here's our fire version. So let's bring that in. So there's our fires. And this would probably sit well over the foreground layer. In fact, yeah, we can probably just put it down here. That should be fine. One thing with the fire is I don't have a holdout geometry for the girl and the pole. So I will have to come up with something for that. I could ask for it, but I will have to come up with something in comp, I think, seeing as we're doing this now. It shouldn't be too difficult because we have the foreground layer as a separate render, and we have the girl as an alpha. So I think I can probably do some masking to get the fire to sit behind her. We'll see what we can kind of come up with. So here's our fire. We add that on. Now fire can be plussed over because it's usually an additive effect. So even though it's rendered, it doesn't actually have an alpha because I didn't render this with any smoke, and the smoke, the density in fire is what provides the alpha. So this doesn't have an alpha, so I can just plus it over. So usually when you have additive effects like fire, anything that's kind of light based, you can plus it, and that works fine. You can see that plus and over actually give me basically the same result, and that's because I don't have that alpha. So let's make this a lot brighter. So I'm going to gain it up. Maybe gamma it down a touch. And then I don't like this super yellow and red tones that I'm getting, or orange tones that I'm getting. So I'm going to put a color correct down as well and just desaturate a little bit. And you can see when I do that it just starts to push it into those white tones and makes it feel a lot hotter. So I'm going to just make sure I've got the sequence here. This fire, these renders are a bit of a mess because I've got so many different versions. There we go. So you can see just by taking out those sort of oversaturated red and yellow tones, it starts to push it into some more realistic exposure sort of tones. You can see now I've got 2 nodes that I can play with. So the color corrector is doing the desaturation. I've got my grade, which is controlling the sort of intensity of it. And it's good to check it all through the duration. So let's go and have a look what it looks like. Man, it's so slow. Check my memory usage is pretty high here. Let's have a look and see. My Houdini is taking up a lot of memory. So I could close that and maybe that would speed things up. Now with fire, my favorite thing in this comp so far is why don't we add another glow? Is always a temptation to add lots of glows, but it usually is not the best thing to go crazy with them. But I find just a little bit, very subtle glow, just adds a little bit of kind of, I don't know, bit of atmosphere to your shot, as if the fire is illuminating tiny little bits of dust in the scene, and just kind of, yeah, makes it feel a bit less clean, a bit less clinical and digital. If you add a little bit of these kind of atmospheric, you can see how the moon one is working quite well to make it feel like there's a bit of mist or fog in the air that the light is illuminating. So again, we could do 2. We could have a broad one and a tight one. So just playing with the size. And the brightness could be higher on the tight one. No, maybe that's too much. Don't go crazy with it. I have to keep telling myself that. Alright, so there we go. We've got two glows happening. Usually a supervisor in a film studio will tell you to turn off all your stupid glows, because you usually go over the top with them. But, you know, I do think a little bit does definitely help. Okay, so there's our fire. That's looking quite cool. And let's have a look at what else we have. So we've got, I'll sort these by date so I can grab the latest. Here's the breath. Let's have a look at that. And I think this one doesn't seem like it's lining up because I might have rendered this one at half res. So let's have a look at this one. You can see there's my breath render. Just load in the full sequence. There it is. You can see the lights in there as well. Okay. But that one is actually, it's quite a low res render, but it's also only half res. So when we composite it over the top of everything else that's 1920 by 1080, it doesn't line up. So we need to add a reformat in there. And choose the correct resolution. You can see the default resolution is not correct and it's giving us this weird stretching. So I'm going to choose HD 1080 and there we go, it sits in correctly. So this render is pretty low resolution, you can see, but I think it'll be okay just for sort of getting something in there. I'm actually going to knock it back a lot. So it's going to be really subtle. You can see when I do that, the noise sort of doesn't really become an issue anymore. So let's have a look at that. You can see one issue with this render that I have is that we've got these very strong kind of lights in there. We've got that orange light from the fire. And then we've got this really hard shadow, which is being cast from the moon down past Kong. And we get this really sort of strong line in here. So one thing you can do with renders when the lighting isn't really working is to shuffle the alpha, potentially. Let me have a look at the alpha channel of this. So hit A. And the alpha channel, yeah, you can see the alpha channel's nice and solid and we don't get that line in there. So what I'm going to do is actually shuffle the channels around. And that's kind of what the shuffle is referring to, is that it allows you to shuffle channels into different channels. What I'm going to do is put the alpha channel into the color slots. So I'll plug all these in, and you can see now my color is actually what the alpha looked like. So the alpha and the color, I'm hitting A, and you can see up here it's swapping between. The alpha and the color actually looks no different. This is something that I do with fire sometimes when I'm not happy with the fire shader that I put on there and I can't sort of balance it correctly in the comp. I will shuffle the alpha, or shuffle just the red. In the case of fire, it's probably just shuffling the red channel. So let's have a look. Have a look at that one, because we don't have an alpha. We have a red channel only. Or sorry, we have red, green and blue, but I can shuffle the red channel into all channels, and then I get white. So I get white fire that I could then potentially recolor with grade, and I get a much more kind of uniform distribution of color. So sometimes when you have those fires that are really like white, yellow, red, and they just don't look realistic, sometimes I'll do this and just completely recolor the fire, and that occasionally works a lot better than trying to fiddle with the colors that you already have. So there's an interesting tip. And you also you can end up with an alpha that way. If you plug the red into alpha, you can get yourself an alpha as well, which occasionally is handy. But we don't need to do that. So, hello from Scotland. I'm on the Intro to Nude course. Oh, cool, great. Well, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the course, and I hope I can teach you something. I'm not, compositing is not my main focus in my job. When I work on films, it's not the main thing that I do, but it is a large part of working in effects, is that you do have to composite your own effects to present them. Depends on the studio that you work at, but certainly at a lot of the studios that I've worked at, especially smaller studios, you do have to know how to composite your stuff effectively, and it is the best way to present your own work. So, so hopefully I can, I can share with you some things that I've learned as an effects artist, learning to composite, and they might be different things than what you learn in the traditional compositing sense. So now I've got this breath that doesn't have any of that color information, but I can take that color information and add it back in if I want to. So yeah, I'm not going to get into an argument about what's better, comp or effects, but I certainly enjoy effects, but I also really do like working in Nuke, because the thing that is different about it to working in Houdini is that it's instant, apart from my comp being quite slow at the moment. My changes are instantaneous. I can change a color and I don't have to re-render. It's just done. That part I love about comp, is that, I don't have to wait. There's no simulating time, or very little rendering time. When you're finished, you'll have to render everything out, but it's just so much faster. So what I've done here is I've just grabbed my original render that did have the lighting in it, and I can plus it back on if I want to have some of that lighting information in there. I can just have it in there subtly, or I could manipulate that lighting information too. So I could just gamma it up a little bit. This dark shadow I really don't like, so I'm trying to avoid that. But you can see how I can just add a little bit of a hint to it. For the fire, for example, as well, we don't have to necessarily use this lighting that we have. I have this fire element, and I can use that to grade my breath that I have, or anything else that I have in my scene. If I put a grade down, and let's make something that looks a bit like a firelight, so orangey kind of light, there we go. But I'm applying it to everything at the moment, so I really only want to apply it to where the fire is. So what I'm going to do is kind of what I was doing before. I'll take a shuffle, and I'll shuffle red into alpha, and I guess I'll just disconnect all these other things, because really I'm only interested in this alpha channel now. If I plug the alpha channel as a mask into this grade, you see that now that orange grade that I had is just affecting the area where the fire is, but that's a bit too tight. So what I'm going to do is put a blur down blur, and channels are all, so it's blurring the alpha. So you can see, you can choose what you're affecting. So you can blur the alpha, and plug that in, have a look at that. So now I've got this blurred kind of effect. And I can also gain up the alpha channel. So I'll set the channels to all again. And I can make that alpha, which is the mask, more dense. And the more dense my alpha, the more it will kind of impart that grade on. So you can see when I lay that over and then the fire over the top, I end up getting this kind of fake lighting on the dust. So that's something that I do all the time, rather than using an actual volume light to illuminate something. You can quite often get away with doing that in comp, and it saves you a lot of time, and it's tweakable, you know. It's kind of like adding a glow, I guess, but I'm adding it to actually that effect element. So that is definitely something that I do a lot, because volume lights are incredibly expensive. So you can see I can turn that one off, and then I can apply that firelight like that. Northbound, what is this shot for? This is a shot for CG Spectrum, so this will be used in the compositing course as a shot that people learn how to composite. I've been generating all the elements for it, well, all the effects elements anyway. The background and Kong and foreground and lighting were done by someone else, but this will be used as a training shot, a sort of shot kit where you're provided all the assets and you can composite them, learn how to composite it all together. What I'm doing is really just what we would call a kind of bash comp. So I'm not compositing this for final, because like I said, I'm not a compositor. So there are things that a compositor will do that I don't really focus on, like making sure that the black levels, the levels of the shot are kind of all balanced, that the whites are, not clipping, all those sort of things. Those are things that I'm not terribly fussed about. I just want to make it look visually kind of appealing and make sure that everything's working. And then a compositor will make sure that everything's working and looking great, but also technically is going to work when they pass the shot off. So I'm just sort of doing a bash comp to make sure that all the layers go together and that everything is working and that I don't need to change any of the 3D elements. So there we go, I've got a little bit of the moonlight back in there, just very subtly. So if we have a look at that, we can play through, hopefully it'll sort of kick in and start working a little better. So yeah, this, as an effects artist, this is the sort of thing that you would do. A bash comp. You try to do it to a high level, but there are things in the comp that you're not necessarily worrying about, like, those things that I was saying, clipping, black levels, white levels, all that stuff. Those are not things that I'm terribly concerned with at this stage. So yeah, this is taking forever. I'll see if I can get it to be a little bit faster. It could be my disk as well. Some of these renders are coming off a very slow disk that I have, which could be the culprit. The next element that we're going to bring in is the dust as well. So we're gonna get that dust on there, which is, as he's breathing, the sort of effect of him breathing is displacing some dust on the environment. So there you go. You can see we get a little bit of a memory playback with comp, and you can see that's all working pretty well. I mean, maybe the breath is a little bit intense. You can always knock it back in the over. You can take the mix down, so you can always do that. But I think it's a good idea just to make sure that your kind of lighting is, is the right intensity as well before you start mixing things back, because that is just like a kind of opacity fade. It's better to try and get your effect balanced before you start fading things down. We could try just crushing this as well so that we end up with slightly brighter lights. Okay, there we go. I mean, it's pretty subtle, this breath effect, but I think that'll work pretty well. Kaboom. Um, Alright, so dust. Dust is the next thing that we want to bring in. Let's have a look at that. Dust V2, here we go. Oops. I hate it how it does this, where it rehooks up the thing that you have selected. That's really annoying. Alright, so dust. Dust is going to go over the foreground layer, so it can kind of go in here. It's always a good idea just to make sure you have enough room for yourself so that you can layer things up and fit in everything that you need. Okay, so here's my dust. I'll just make sure that I've got that correct version. Dust V2, yes. And merge. And this one does have an alpha channel, so it will be an over. So let's have a look. There's the alpha channel. So you can see, you know, the alpha channel does look different to the lighting here. So merge over. Let's just play this through here. Hopefully it plays. There we go. So nice subtle kind of dust effect, not too over the top. And let's have a look at that. There we go. It's really kind of annoying that that it's taking so long to update. So I'm going to close my Houdini, and hopefully that will improve things. You can also clear the cache in Wick, so that can sometimes help. But you know, I suspect that it's just maybe memory and read issues that are causing the slowdown. Some of these file sizes can be quite large as well. What is my hardware setup like? It's not too bad. So yeah, I'm just having a look at these. They're pretty large file sizes per frame, so yeah, that could be a reason why it's running slow as well. My hardware setup is not, you know, it's not top of the line. Let's see, it's a Core i7, I think. Core i7, 3.6 gigahertz, only 8 cores. So not tons. I've got a NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2070, which is not too bad for GPU stuff, although we're not really using that for Nuke. I do use that for Redshift, which works quite well. And yeah, that's, you know, and then I've got some solid state drives that I've just put in, which have made a difference for I/O. So I think if I copied these renders onto that solid state drive, that might improve the read time. But yeah, I don't go for top of the line computer gear. Usually, I sort of go for affordable mid-range gaming type PCs, because you have to upgrade them quite often. I find it's just not worth spending tons and tons of money on them. The other reason is too, I'm not, you know, when I'm working as well, I'm not working at home. So I feel like, you know, if I spend a lot of money on a workstation at home, then it's just kind of sitting there languishing. And then eventually I have to update it because it gets too old. Saying that, I would love more RAM. You know, I only have, I think I only have 32 gig, which I frequently hit the limit on that. So that is definitely something that I could upgrade to 64 gig. I think would be enough. And then potentially another graphics card would be handy for Redshift. But yeah, look, I find I kind of work with the limitations that I have with any PC. So I think the better your computer, I will always hit the limit no matter what it is, because I just push things harder. And I think when you have a faster and more powerful computer, you start to become slightly less efficient in the way that you work, because you can. So I think it's always good to try and work as efficiently as possible and make things run on a machine that, you know, isn't super powerful. That is always a good challenge. another reason that I don't go super high is that I try to... What is Redshift? So I try to not use everything that my computer can handle for things that I set up for students, because a student potentially might be working on like a MacBook or something, and that is definitely not going to be able to handle something, you know, that I can handle on this desktop. So I try to keep what I'm creating to a level that everyone can potentially achieve. And you could always go higher if you can, but at least the base level everyone can kind of get to. What is Redshift? Redshift is a renderer for Houdini. It's a renderer for lots of different 3D packages, but I use it in Houdini, so it's a GPU renderer. Traditional renderers like Mantra in Houdini use CPU, and they're quite slow. Mantra is particularly slow. It's one of the slowest out there. So GPU renderers are usually a lot faster because of the architecture of the GPU and the way they've been set up. They're often loads faster. To give you an idea, I have been rendering this other shot, which is 4K for the weekend, like 3 days or so it was rendering. And if I was to do that on Mantra, I can't even imagine how long it would have taken. It would still be going, probably, and that was like 10 different passes that I've rendered out over 3 days. I would probably still be on the first pass. I saw something on the Houdini Facebook forum just before that somebody had rendered out a cloud image, and he said, this render took 90 hours. And someone said, oh, how many frames was that? And he was like, 1. So 1 frame, 90 hours long, which is ridiculous. I mean, he had crazy settings, but yeah, Mantra is incredibly slow. So Redshift, it's great. I mean, it has some limitations, and some things are slower than others in Redshift, but it saves you a lot of time. There are lots of GPU renderers out there. Redshift is just one of them. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, then you can look up GPU rendering. I'm not sure what Nick really uses for its rendering. I would say that it's a combination of CPU and GPU. Yeah, exactly. 20 minutes to 45 seconds. I've had the same. You know, things that potentially have taken an hour in Mantra have been done in minutes in Redshift. The catch is, I suppose, that working in Redshift is you have to kind of change the way that you're shading, because you have to use Redshift shaders. All the lights are different, and you can't do things as easily as what you can do with Mantra. So I still use Mantra for a lot of things. I mean, I use Mantra for all this stuff because it's easy as well. You can just hit render and put a shader on, and you get what you expect. But certainly, the gains in render time are much better, and you can do other things with your time then once you get your renders back. That's the problem with rendering at home is, it ties up your machine for a long time when you're rendering a lot of stuff. You can't really do too much else. I have to close everything when I'm rendering really big stuff because it just takes all the memory. Redshift rendered view is beautifully fast. Yeah, I don't use the interactive renderer all that much, Robert. I don't know why. I find that it doesn't update all that well when you're changing things. It doesn't always take the updates. Hey, I like Mantra too, Patrick. I just wish it was faster. What about Karma? Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard people, say, why don't you use Karma, etc. But in my opinion, Karma is still in beta. So I just really don't like the way that it has been implemented in Houdini as a different context. I just don't understand why they did that. It just creates a lot of extra work setting stuff up. So yeah, I don't know. I don't like it. But yeah, I won't really touch Karma until they sort out all the bugs. I found it when I did try to use it. It was incredibly buggy. So yeah, it's not really something that I will be using until until it does come out of beta. Hopefully, hopefully it's good, and they can kind of work out all those bugs and maybe improve some of the usability things. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the things with using Houdini in studios is all these things that come out, like Karma and Tops, all that sort of stuff. It's not stuff that if you're working in a studio, it's not stuff that you really use, because you have already got solutions for a lot of those problems. They might be custom, or they might be some other software that the studio has bought. But that is often a reason why people don't pick these things up. Certainly in the industry, because they have other solutions for these problems. I'm definitely interested in learning about Tops for working at home, setting up pipelines, and PDG, stuff like that. But yeah, I think I think some of these things just need to be developed a little more, and fix some of those usability issues. Although PDG of Tops, I think, is working fine. I haven't investigated it. You wanted Octane, but it didn't convince me like Redshift. Yeah, well, look, 3 to Light as well. I've heard a lot of good things about 3 to Light. So that's another one that you could look into. I don't know if it's still in beta, but it apparently handles volumes incredibly well. And it's not very expensive, I think. They also have something like a cloud rendering sort of thing that you can use, which sounds interesting, where I think you can access... you can upload and access their cloud rendering, which sounds pretty good. But that's definitely something to look into, 3 to Light, because it's another GPU-based option, and very, very fast from all accounts that I've heard. I think rendering, you just choose the best option, with whatever is going to give you the best results. And for me, Mantra sometimes gives me the best results. It might not be the fastest, but for instance with Fire, I find Redshift incredibly difficult to dial in a good Fire shader. I have found some ways of working with it to get the best out of it, but I find it incredibly difficult, whereas with Mantra I know exactly how to get what I want immediately, and it's not difficult, and it doesn't require a whole lot of fiddling with things. But with Redshift, it's just, I find it incredibly difficult to dial it in. So yeah, it's I think you just choose the best renderer for the job, and see which one does what you want. Alright, so I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I need to add in here. Let me check my render passes. We've got the breath, we've got dust. I can show you what the grit looks like. Let's have a look at the grit, because I did choose to... oh, there we go, lost my connection again. Because I did choose to not use the grit, because it just really wasn't working that well. Let's take a look. Version 11. Get RTX 3090. Well, yeah, I mean, that would be nice. How is your RTX going, Robert? I think that would definitely make a difference. But it's still, it's still difficult to do certain things in Redshift that are really easy in Mantra. So here's the grit, and I just felt that this was a bit too fast and swirly, and just wasn't really working. So I decided to just leave that out. Oh, I just realized I'm in 50% mode here. That's why it's all looking a little spotty. Yeah, it's missing a few frames at the end there, because I think I just cancelled the render when I realized in the comp that it wasn't working. But when I layer this over, I just couldn't get it to look good. And part of that is just the motion of it. So, I mean, it's very subtle, but when you do catch it, little glints of the grit, the motion just is too much. So I could go back and fix it and make it slower, but I actually don't think it's a necessary element when I look at everything together. The leaves, you know, kind of help, just a subtle kind of swirling element, but the grit really, you know, doesn't need to be there, I don't think. Let's have a look, make sure. This one is half res as well, that's why I can't see it properly. So I'll just copy my reformat. And let's see if we can see it. There it is there. So let's have a little bit of a look at that. Still running very slow, fortunately. Makes it kind of hard to work with. Just making sure that I've got all the elements. So breath, dust, grit, drool. I think that's everything. Fire. Okay. So it's really hard to see, but you can kind of see it. Have a look at this stuff here. You can kind of see this stuff being blown around, and a few little kind of really fast moving spotty things here. And it just sort of, you know, to me, it just doesn't really suit. It's a bit too over the top. So because I don't think I need it, I'm just going to ditch it and not worry about fixing it. Sometimes you do these effects and they don't work, and you know, you decide that they're not actually necessary, so that's fine. You know, try things. If they don't work, just ditch them. Looks like we've got a frame hold happening here before 250. So in that case, when you have an effect that is starting at a particular frame that is not your start frame, you can see, I don't know if you can make it out, but you can see how it's actually holding here. This is the first frame of the grit, and before 250 it's actually static. So you need to set your frame range behavior to just black, so that before 250 it's just off. So I probably need to render the entire sequence if I was going to use that, but that's what you can do if you have like an explosion or something starting at a particular frame, and the first frame of that render is something, but you don't want it to be there until 250, say, then you need to set your frame range to black so that it doesn't show up until it needs to. Alright, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then let's just go and have a look at the whole thing and see what we've got going on. Make sure, see if we need to change anything. Overall, it's pretty dark, so I'm not sure what the expected kind of look is that they want, but I'm inclined to kind of lift some of these renders up a little bit just by gammering up a touch. Don't want to go crazy with it, but just to introduce a little bit of extra detail there. And the background is pretty dark as well, so I think I'll just lift that up a touch. That's really really disappearing there into the background. I guess one thing simultaneous is the Super Bowl on? I didn't know that. Or are you watching like a rerun or something? Not that I'm up on my American football, but I usually would have. I thought I usually would have heard if the Super Bowl was on. One thing I realized is this background layer doesn't actually have a sky in it, so it's just black, which is why it's very dark back there. So I might put a constant down and set the constant to 1920 by 1080, and then merge. Also set that to a color. You know, maybe I'll make a blue, really dark blue color, and then merge that underneath. No worries. See you later, Trash Art. Thanks for joining me. So you know, maybe I'll just sort of play with that, make it a little bit of blue. Let's try that. Perhaps I should put that grade before the merge. so that I'm not affecting that color. Okay, let's have a look at that. Go to the very end. Okay, that blue is a little too intense. Let's just take that down. Just a tiny little bit in there, just so it's not completely black. There we go. And we could... Oh, one thing that we haven't looked at is how to get this fire going behind the character. So let's have a look at that. So it's right sort of at the start when the camera is panning. Here we go. This is the problem. Yeah, so that fire should be behind the pole and the character, but we don't have a holdout for her. So how are we going to deal with that? So we have on the foreground layer this alpha that we can use. So what I'm going to do is, let's have a look. Where's that fire? Here. I might just copy this layer down here. And you can see if I put a multiply down and plug in the foreground layer as a mask and multiply that to 0, you can see that I get that fire being cut out behind that alpha. So that actually might be all we need to do. Let's have a look. I want to do that, yeah, just here. I could do it after the glows. Let's see. If I do it after the glow, what I'll get is that glow still coming through behind. But if I do it before the glow, let's try that. You see how I get sort of no glow coming through? Because the main body of that fire has been removed. So it sort of doesn't have anything to glow off of. But if I do it after the glow, turn that one off, then I still get this nice glow coming through, because essentially the fire is then still there, but then I'm multiplying it out. So the glow has already been applied. And then when that goes behind, I get that nice glow. So, you know, it is important where you decide to do your kind of masking. So I think, let's see if this works. I was thinking it might have to be more complicated than this, but perhaps not. Let's go forward a little more. Sometimes it's useful to use this jump forward as well, so you can jump forward 10 frames at a time, or you can change that increment. There's a problem. So it is slightly more complicated. Because now what's happened is that it's gone behind this torch geometry. So I think we're going to have to do some crafty roto. So let's have a look. You can see that we've got this torch geometry in there. So that is now actually cutting out the fire, and that should be behind or inside of the fire. So I actually don't want that section of the foreground to affect my fire. So here's where I'm going to do some roto. I quite enjoy doing roto. You know, I don't have to do a lot of it, but when I do it, it's kind of a little bit of fun for a little while, and then eventually it gets a little bit boring. But what I'm going to do is just create a roto shape like that, and I'm going to multiply it out of the alpha. Now this is the tedious part, is that once I've decided that, I need to then do this over time. So I need to animate this roto shape, and I want to make sure that I don't... This is going to be the tricky part, is I want to make sure that I don't actually take any of the character with the pole away. This is why it would be easier to have the, you know, the correct geometry in the first place, but sometimes that's not always possible. So something like that. So you can see that this now animates this roto shape. You can see how those Bezier kind of dots moving and interpolating. So go forward, jump forward a lot, and you can see even there it's still fine, so I'll just move it a tiny bit to set a keyframe. Go to 250, oh, move it. We're really only concerned about that little section there, but I'm just doing a little bit more for overkill. Let's go to 270. So for these, large movements, you can just set very sparse keyframes. You don't need keyframes every so often. And then you've got these keyframe buttons where you can jump between the different keyframes. Now, this section is probably where we need to spend the most time, where it's actually kind of starting to go behind. So let's have a look at that. We're starting there. We'll go back a couple of frames. That's still okay. You can also turn off the multiply so you can see everything that you're working with. So there we go. Keep going back. This is where it's going to get tricky, and I probably don't have enough enough points to do that hand properly. But let's just kind of do it very roughly. Make sure I get that a little bit up. And this is where it gets kind of tedious. It's just when you have to do very, very kind of specific stuff like this, it gets a little bit boring, especially if you've got to do a lot of keyframes. But there's something kind of enjoyable about it as well. It's a little bit different to what you have to do in Houdini. I'm sure people that do this for a job probably feel differently about it. This is called kind of rotoscoping, I guess they call it, in compositing world. You might have to do this for a character or something, or an actor. You might need to rotoscope around them to extract them from the background. All right, I think that's probably all I need to do there, and then I'll just kind of move this away off there, and then it'll sort of jump in. So let's have a look at what that does for us. Go and have a look at the fire over the top and hit play. It might be a little bit hokey around this area. You can see that rotor shape there. But on the fly, I mean, this is good for a bash comp. It would definitely want to be fixed for a proper comp. But for me, just being able to see that go behind her now, so I can see some areas that I need to fix. I probably want to add just more points in there. But I think what I'll probably do is ask for the geometry. And I won't have to do that. But when you're working in effects, you do have to do these little kind of roto shape stuff just to sit your effect in behind something. Maybe it's something that's actually in footage that you need to sit it behind. You don't have a holdout for it. A compositor is going to do it properly when you give it to them, but so that you can show your effect working properly, you may need to do that, or you may be asked to do that. So it's good to at least know how to do some simple. Hi, not Spectra. What are the Kong graphics from? The Kong graphics. Hey, JD Smith, Digi Artist. The Kong graphics have been produced by someone else at CG Spectrum for the comp course. So this entire effect has been, or this kind of entire shot has been developed to be used for the comp course that we run. And people will take all of these elements when they're learning about it and composite them all together. So this, has been all produced by us at CG Spectrum. I'm just adding the effects and compositing, doing a quick bash comp today to see everything working, but this will then be incorporated into some tutorials for our advanced compositing course. I hope that's what you meant. has your computer ever stopped working while doing VFX? Oh, all the time. Yeah, I mean, it frequently happens that your computer will crash or run out of memory and your Houdini stops working or your nuke crashes unexpectedly. That is definitely a part of working, in computer graphics in general. You're pushing your computer so hard that it frequently gives up. You sometimes do too much and it just, you can't handle it, so it crashes. Occasionally it will shut down completely, give you the blue screen of death, but usually it will just close whatever you're working on and free up your memory. Crashing, running out of hard drive space, so many things can happen. Hey, no worries, JD. Has your computer ever overheated? No, I haven't really had that problem with my computer overheating, I have to say. Yeah, I don't know. I don't assemble my own computers. I know that some people that have put their own computer together have problems with overheating. I usually just buy an existing workstation. So I would hope that they have sorted that stuff out. But yeah, I can't say that I have had a problem with overheating. I try to keep it in a kind of well-ventilated area. My room certainly gets very hot. But yeah, my computer never has overheated. I'm going to write this out to disks because it's really impossible to play the whole thing in Nuke like this at the moment. So I'm going to put a write node down, and I'm just going to choose a location to save this out to. So I'll just create a comp folder, and then I'm going to call this Kong_version1, and for all you Houdini people, when we're writing out renders in Houdini, it's $f4.exr or something like that. But we don't have this expression in Houdini. In Nuke. So to render out a sequence with padding, the way that you write it in Nuke is %o4d.exr. It's one of those things that I was like, every time I came into Nuke, I would never remember how I was meant to write that. So I frequently had to Google that. Now, finally, it's implanted in my brain, and I remember it. But that's it. %o4d, and the O4 is the padding. So that when you render, let me just hit save. When you render, you end up with sort of a whole bunch of zeros. So if we have a look, these are padded in Houdini, so you can see we end up with 4 numbers: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 numbers there. Okay, so I'm going to write this out. Writing out EXRs, going to hit render, and then the input, I can just choose global, and that will take the settings from the project. If you need to change project settings in Nuke, incidentally, you can hit S in the node graph and change the frame range here. So I'm just going to render that out, and hopefully it won't take too long, although it's looking like it might take a little while. Use a Mac laptop. Well, I think a laptop is probably more prone to overheating, Rizwan, because it is a very small enclosed space and it doesn't have a lot of room. I think they have fans. I don't know. I think the way that they deal with heat is different. If you've ever been using a laptop on your lap when you're working and doing something intensive, they do get very, very hot. I know you can get like bases for them that have fans in them that can try and cool them down, but certainly laptops. I used to do a lot of work on a laptop. It got very hot. I would have it on a desk, and sometimes I would put it on little risers so that I got airflow underneath it. But I could imagine that happening on a laptop, overheating, especially if you're doing really intensive 3D work or something. I think laptops great for portability, but for doing high-end VFX work, they're a little bit limited in their specs, unless you get something that's really, really heavy, and then it sort of begs the question why you would have that as a laptop. So yeah, does anyone have any questions about Nuke or anything else while we're waiting for this to render? We can talk about things, or we can jump back into Houdini. and have a look at anything. We've still got quite a while till the stream finishes up. So happy to talk about anything if anyone has any questions. I don't know why this render is taking so long. My day job is programming, thinking about setting up a connection to a virtual workstation in the cloud. Has that kind of workflow become more common in the industry since COVID? Yeah, I think it has. I think it definitely has become more common since COVID. That, for a long time, I think people are starting to go back to studios a little bit. Depends on the country. I know in Melbourne, Australia, where I am, that is slowly starting to happen now, although there are still a lot of people working from home. But that's exactly what they're doing. They're remoting in to workstations at their studio, mainly because of security, but it also means that you don't have to have a high power workstation at home if there's one that already exists somewhere. So certainly I think that is going to be more commonplace now. Hopefully, I'm hoping that there will be more remote opportunities for visual effects in the future. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. I know even at some other larger studios, even before COVID, they would use virtual machines, so they can have like a centralized server room full of workstations, and then all the artists are just remoting in to those workstations. And it also means that the artist doesn't have direct access to files and things like that. But I know Sony was like that. Probably quite a few other larger visual effects studios kind of already have that set up. So there probably were already studios kind of doing that sort of thing, and maybe it wasn't that difficult to switch to people doing that from home. Or it's not necessary. What do you mean? Sorry, I see your first question. Do you think an effects artist should learn Nuke? Yes, I do, Reza. I'm sure, I hope I got that right. Yeah, I do think an effects artist should learn Nuke, especially if you want to get into film. But also it makes your life a lot easier, learning how to do a little bit of compositing. It allows you to kind of to make tweaks to things that otherwise you would have to go back to Houdini or to effects to fix in your render. I also think it's important to render things separately so that you can make those changes and make little adjustments. If I had everything rendered together, it would be very difficult for me to go and change that fire. I would have to do a lot of that sort of rotoscoping that I was doing there, and that, as you can see, take a lot of time. So I think it's really important to learn compositing in some form. Whether it's Nuke or whether it's After Effects. Arguably, if you're going for the VFX industry, you want to learn Nuke. If you have a look at job ads for effects, you will often see Nuke in the required skills. Sometimes all you're required to do is just put your render over the background plate or something and not do anything else. But it depends on the studio. At Method in Melbourne, for example, you're required to get your effects comp to quite a high level before it's passed off. So it just depends. But I think it's absolutely a great tool. Whether you need it depends on the studio, but I think it can really improve the way that you work and the speed at which you work if you learn how to composite things and work with layers and rendering layers. I haven't even looked at AOVs yet, but that's something we can talk about once this is finished rendering. I can show you a little bit about AOVs and render elements and how you could potentially use those to affect things. Vicky says, I'd also ask the opposite. How useful is it for compositors to learn at least some effects? I think that's a different story because they are quite different. compositors tend not to, go into the effects world. But I think there are effects in Nuke that you can learn, and that might be something that you could look at if you were a compositor. If you're using Nuke, then there are particle systems in Nuke that you can use, and I've used those for doing rain. I did a whole bunch of rain on the Wolverine movie in Nuke. I set it all up in Nuke, and it was great. I had a lot of fun because it was kind of instant. It worked really well. I could change things, and it all hooked in to the comp, which was great. There are actually fire simulation tools, like plugins that you can buy for Nuke, which seem kind of cool. They're GPU based, so they're kind of fast. I think they're probably limited in what they can achieve, but they're there. So I think it's worth learning about effects. I don't think it's probably necessary to learn Houdini. I think that would be overkill, unless you wanted to be more of a generalist type artist in a smaller studio, say, where you had skills in everything. I think if you want to be a compositor, then you don't need to learn Houdini, but you should learn how to do effects in comp, and also composite effects elements. Find fire plates, learn how to composite them effectively, how to incorporate effects elements into a comp. All that stuff is really worth learning, because it's its own kind of skill. Comping effects is very different to comping footage or an actor or something like that. There's all these kind of little things that you need to worry about with effects, like how does the fire work? How do I get the color right of fire? All those sort of things. Particles. How do I make them look good, or how do I make them show up? Or I think it's important to understand how effects works, but not necessarily learn how to do it. Certainly in Houdini. I think that's just overkill. I hope that answers your question. I've noticed a little problem here behind my progress bar, which I neglected to. Hey, no worries. Which I neglected to change, which is for the holdout of the fire that I was working on here. Here, I've got my torch over the top of the fire, which is very annoying. I forgot to do that. I didn't think about it. Now I've written it out. So I'm just going to copy this path and put it read down again, and then just read it back in. And hopefully that will work. Let me just get the path right. Sequences, there it is. And now it should play back pretty fast. There we go. So it's always good to write things out to see them play back nice and quick. So maybe the breath is a little bit intense, and overall maybe I have lifted things a little much. But at least we can see it all now and see how it's all working. I think, maybe the dust is a little bright. We could knock that back a little bit. The breath, I think, is a little too strong as well. I think that's probably something that I would take down. But yeah, I'll have to fix that, because that fire should be in front of that torch. So let's just go in and make some adjustments to that. So really, you can see I was just dealing with this section over here and multiplying that away, but I actually need to remove that one as well. So I'm going to create a new rotor shape instead of adding another one to here. And I think I can just chain these up like this. Let's try that. Overlay off so I can't see my rotor shape, so you just hit Q to turn it on. And then I can sort of draw it around there. There we go. So that hopefully, yep, that all still works. So then I can just sort of, usually I'll just go like every 10 frames and make sure that it's all still sitting in the right spot. I can just line it up to my center point here. So, you know, having a few of these little skills definitely helps you be able to produce a, you know, a better shot. Being able to tweak this stuff, add little optical elements like glow, and even, you know, even composite in some 2D elements. It all helps you produce a better effect shot. And just being able to fix errors in 2D rather than in 3D, because the 3D side of things is the most time consuming. Alright, and go back to frame 150, our first frame. There we go. So that now that we've added that one in, let's put our fire back on top of the torch, which is great. So there we go. And I think, yeah, I think for the dust, I'll probably just... I don't love the fact that the dust is kind of this grey colour as well. I think that's coming from the moonlight. So I might just make a little tweak on that. Just make it a little bit redder. Something like that. Don't want to go too crazy with it. Maybe a little bit too subtle. There we go. And the breath, let's just knock that back a little bit as well. So, down here. There we go. Alright. And I think... let's go back to the very start, because that's where it sort of looked brighter. Sort of gets darker, I guess, as he comes in front of the moon, he gets into shadow. Right at the start, he looks a little bit too light and lifted, so I think I have gone a little bit too much on my little adjustments that I've done in here. So let's just take that down. Whoa, too much. There we go. Just a little bit. And this one too. Again, you can see how like this gamma that I've got on there is affecting the moon. So potentially you could put a roto shape in there and just remove that section. And you do have different options for the roto, so you could do an ellipse around the moon. And then now that grade is only affecting the moon, but I actually want it to do the opposite. So I can invert it, and now it's just affecting the background and not the moon. And of course, I do need to make sure that that goes with the moon. So you can see how I've got all these different keyframes in here, and that's because I've got all these nodes in here, and probably the roto there is from another one. So all these keys are showing up. If I hit one in here, it gets rid of all those other properties for all the other nodes, and now I can just see those keyframes show up. So I can jump between just those keyframes. There's probably another way to filter things in the timeline, but that's the method I use for just showing up the node that I'm working on. So just keep going, wait for it to update. Just very broad kind of strokes animation should be fine for this. And then you can click back through and make sure that it's kind of working. Wait for it to update. There we go. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. Okay, so now my grade is only being applied and I'm not affecting the moon. So this one I can probably just turn down a little bit so it's not super bright. There we go. All the way down here. Cool. Well, I'm mostly happy with that. I think, you know, as a little bash comp, just to make sure that everything is working, that this is great. You know, it shows up all my effects elements. Maybe just try making these fires pop a little more, give those a little bit of a stronger glow. Could you stop the moon getting graded too by unpre-multiplying before the grade and pre-multiplying after it instead of using a rotor? Well, it is part of the alpha, though. Let's see. So if I unpre-multiply grade and then pre-multiply, it is still going to affect. I mean, yeah, it's not really doing much now. It is still affecting the moon. Is that what you meant, Vicky? I guess if the moon wasn't part of the alpha, then that would work maybe, although it would probably disappear if it was pre-multiplied. Let's try. Yeah, that's right. So it is part of the same layer. That's why I have to kind of do the roto. So it probably would be good if the moon was separate, and we could isolate it. Yeah, we could multiply it out, and just remove it, and then composite it in again. But yeah, just doing a selective kind of grade like that is fine. Quite often, you know, the things that I do to comps, a compositor will probably delete and redo in a more effective or probably better way. But for me, you know, like I said at the start, it's just about kind of making it look as good as I can. And then when I pass it on to a compositor, they'll check and make sure that things are working properly, and probably redo certain things to make them more effective or make them correct, so that they don't have any problems. Let's have a look at this. So we can play around with that as well, that sort of bloom over Kong's head. Here's something interesting that we could do as well. Am I going to tackle the Rebel Way FX challenge today? No, I'm not, Patrick. I'm going to tackle that probably next week, I was thinking. I hadn't really planned what I was going to do next week, so I thought I could tackle Rebel Way next week. So if you have any questions about that, then please let me know, or things that you would like me to kind of look at with the Rebel Way stuff. I'm typing Rebel Way in here, but obviously that's not going to work. What I was thinking is, you can see how this glow is going over the top of Kong completely like that. And I like that, but maybe I don't want it to kind of go all over the top of him. Maybe I want it to be a kind of more of a photographic bloom effect, where it actually just sort of blooms over the top here. So what I could do there is take my Kong layer. So I'm just going to put a grade down over here and hook that up to Kong. And maybe put a multiplier down here after the glow. So you can see when I do that, it sort of removes Kong from the glow, which is not entirely what I want. But now in here, on the Kong alpha, I'm going to, let's put a dilate. Oh, I think it's called a road. A road fast blur. Let's try road fast. There it's called dilate. So it's called dilate, but it's called a road in the tab menu. And you can see when I do that, I get this, I can erode the alpha. So when I have a look at the mask, what I end up with is this kind of erosion effect. You can see it's sort of, the edges don't look that great, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do next is just blur the alpha as well. And then when I have a look at the plus, you can see I get, you know, it's not perfect, but I can kind of try and get this blooming effect happening. So if I, maybe even just blurring actually might work well instead of dilating, or maybe the dilate's just too strong. I think actually it works well without the dilate, but we could probably just play with that a tiny bit. So there we go. And that, you know, instead of getting the moon going over the entire face, it just kind of gets it going over the hair a little bit. you can sort of play with that as well. We could also plus that onto the Kong as well instead of over everything, so we could control that independently from everything else. But this is the sort of stuff that I really enjoy in Nuke, is taking alphas from other channels and, you know, being able to adjust them. Now, one thing that I haven't looked at with any of these renders is extra channels. So I don't think I actually have anything in any of my channels that I can use, although let's have a look at the breath. No, it doesn't look like it. Let's have a look at Kong. I don't know if these do have any extra channels, but they might. Let's see. Ah, yeah, we do. So this is the really good thing about compositing, is that you can, and rendering out of 3D, is that you can output different layers of the render into different channels. So got some of them seem to be empty, or shadows don't seem to have anything. Specular. There we go, there's a specular pass. And they often look really cool, some of them. So there's our RGB. And there is just our specular. That's a specular direct. And then specular indirect will be like the bounce specular. So you can actually use those to change. There's transmission. Ooh, look, there's the eyes. So you can use those to affect your comp and change. There's the SSS, which is kind of cool. And change the way that your lighting is looking. So the specular, for example, if we go to RGBA, turn this down, and then the way that we access those, so they're stored in the EXR, it's a multi-channel EXR. If I shuffle, then I can access those. So you can shuffle specular, for example. So the specular channel now is being shuffled into RGB. So what we can do is, let's say someone asked, can we have Kong look a bit more reflective? You can shuffle out the specular channel, for example. Maybe we grade it up, gain it up like that, maybe gamma down, something like that, to get some really shiny highlights. And then you could merge that back over and plus it onto your render. And you can see now I've got this like super shiny Kong, and it doesn't work so well on the hair, but I've actually increased the kind of specularity of Kong there. It looks a bit weird on the eyes too. When you're doing this with a character, really what you want to do is actually shuffle out all the different components that you have and recombine them all together so that you can kind of control everything separately. But here I'm just shuffling out one component and adding it back in. And you can see how I can add like extra highlights to the teeth that way, and maybe through a roto shape or some other mask that I have, I could potentially just get that in a particular area. For instance, here, I could add extra specularity potentially just to the edges of Kong's fur. So, you know, maybe using a mask, maybe similar to how I've done this, where I've got this kind of thing going on. I could just then mask this shuffled specularity to just be that area kind of around the moon. We could try and take that. At the moment, let's have a look. What have we got? We could try and take this RGBA layer. Let's shuffle that. It's not actually in the alpha, but it's just RGBA. If you look at the alpha, that isn't what we want. But if we take this, we could shuffle all of that into alpha, or just the red channel into alpha. Then our alpha looks like that. If we then take that over here, maybe to this plus, you can see how I'm just adding an extra specularity hit to around that moon area. So you can do some really cool stuff. You know, and I end up with these crazy comps with spiderwebs going everywhere. I'm just going to grade up the alpha channel of this glow that I created so that I can end up with a more solid alpha. So you can see, look at the correct location. So you can see how I can lift that and make that a more solid mask. And that then will make that blend a lot stronger. So you can see how you can adjust that. So you can make some really cool kind of adjustments to your comp this way, and it really just helps enhance the overall effect of your you know, of the look of your shot. So this is the power of compositing, and why, you know, why I love it and why I recommend effects artists learn it, because it allows you just to make these really kind of nice, subtle changes that lifts your effect out from being a completely digital looking thing to being something really beautiful. And these are the things that we're doing in VFX to make stuff look realistic and make stuff not feel like a digital effect. So yeah, you can kind of play with that. We could also modify the color of this specular pass so that it was sort of more of this blue kind of hit from the moon. So you could always do that. So you can see, yeah, shuffling these, you know, shuffling color channels into alpha, using them as masks, shuffling out extra image planes. If you're interested in mantra, so I don't think I've done this for anything. Let's have a look at the draw. See if I did it for the draw. Where is the draw? Here. Did I do anything for the draw? No, I didn't. So I closed my Houdini, but give me a second, I'll open it up again. And we can have a look at how we can set something like that up. It's pretty straightforward for mantra. It's pretty straightforward for redshift as well. So let me open this up again. Kong. And it's cooking something. Cooking the draw simulation. That's why it's always a good idea to save your frame at frame 1 so it doesn't have to cook 300 frames of a simulation when you open the file. But you can always hit escape. Okay, so let's have a look at the draw, for example. I think I haven't actually cached this. Oh no, I did cache it to disk, so I don't know why it's calculating. Maybe it's the vellum. So if we have a look at the draw version 3. Let's do a draw version 4. Under images, extra image planes, here's where we can add those channels. So if I hit plus, I can choose one of these custom vex variables and add in things like direct, what do I want? Direct reflectivity, direct lighting per component, combined lighting per component. So you can actually, I've got lots of lights in this scene. So that can be a really cool thing to do as well. So let's just do a test frame. So I'll add extra image planes, direct lighting per component is an interesting one. Let's try that. Let's go to a frame where we have some draw. A bit further. Yeah, I think it's calculating the vellum there. Okay, so let's try this. So I'll hit render to... Actually, I'll do it here. Render view, draw. Okay, so we're going to turn on the view bar, and then up here is our layers that we're outputting now. And you can see we're getting direct diffuse, direct reflect, direct coat, refract, volume, SSS. Now we don't have some of these, so direct diffuse we have, because there must be a diffuse component to our shader. So if we have a look at the material, I'm not sure which material it is. Let's just check on the draw. Ah, it's called draw. Makes sense. There it is. So yeah, our transparency is not fully 100%. So that means that it's allowing some of this base color diffuse to come through, just giving us this. So there is some diffuse component. If we have a look at reflection, let's just turn on the color correction, crank it up. There's our reflection component. Coat, we don't have a coat on our shader. If we have a look at our shader, we can see coat is 0, so that makes sense. Refraction, should have refraction. There we go, it's very dark, but there's our refraction layer. And we don't have volume, because it's not a volume, and I don't think we have FSS. No, nothing there. So there's 3 components there that aren't being used. But it can be really handy to, when you're in comp, have access to the various individual elements. So I can say, actually I want this to be more reflective or less, and I can turn that up or down. Now, another thing that's really handy is, instead of doing direct component, so export variable for each component is what is outputting all those different versions, or those different elements, you can do direct lighting, and then under light exports, export variable for each light. And this is really handy for relighting something. So there's our render. If we have a look now, we can see we've got all these different lights. So these are actually all the different lights in the scene, and you can, back in comp, decide to turn them up or down. If you wanted to, let's say, turn the moonlight down or up, I could go and find that, and you can see actually the moonlight isn't really having any effect on the draw, probably because it's behind Kong. But here's the firelight from the torches, so I could turn that up if I wanted that to be really intense. So it's really handy to have these AOVs, and that's what we use a lot in film. Is we output a render with a ton of information so that we can then go and tweak certain things. Hey, no worries, Vicky. Thanks for joining me. You can always catch up after this is finished if you want to see the rest. But I think that's probably about all we have for Nick today. But thanks for joining me. Patrick says, what about compositing inside Houdini cop context? Well, yeah, I mean, Houdini does have a built-in compositing workflow. So let me stop this. I've used this. I've used this at studios when they didn't want to buy me a copy of Nuke. It's not the most amazing compositing experience you've ever had, but it does work, and you can do, you know, simple comps in here. So if I bring in those same renders into here, so here's let's see, breath, here we go, let's have a look at that. There's that render, and I could bring in, copy that, bring in something else. Let's bring in the torches. You don't have things like glow in here, so there is no glow tool. So that, you know, that can be a bit annoying when you want to do optical effects. But you've got all the same operations like overing, plussing, add. I think it's called add. That you can composite all these things together. So let's add the fire to the breath. So it is the same sort of process. I probably need to add like can't remember. Oh, let's specific resolution. Let's do 1920 by 1080. There we go. So, no, delete. There we go. So if you wanted to do a glow, for example, this is the kind of interesting thing, is that because it's Houdini, you can kind of do create your own tools. So you can create a glow in here if you wanted to, and it would just be a matter of blurring an image and then recombining it with itself. So here's our blurred effect, and then we would just want to plus, add that back onto the original, and then have like a grade in there, color correct, I guess it's called, and be able to multiply that up and down, play with that, and then you could wrap that up into a subnet. So you could subnet that and call it glow and promote the various settings, and then every time you want to apply that, you could write that out as a HDA if you wanted to, create digital asset, and then you could have a glow digital asset, which is kind of cool. I've done this, I've done it before, I've done it a lot, and you can do a decent comp in here, but it's a little bit fiddly to do certain things like the glows and like anything kind of a bit more complicated. But for simple stuff, you can do it, and it means that you don't have to leave Houdini. But yeah, look, it's not a full-featured visual effects compositing package, but it is there. If you want to do simple stuff, you can do it, even if it's just checking that all your renders kind of work and that you have everything that you need. Sometimes in the compositing context, I'll bring in like a HDRI, for example. Let's say that you have a HDRI that has a sunlight in it that you want to get rid of because it's causing really hot reflections on your model. You could bring it in to something like this and color correct it, or maybe use like a roto shape or something to try and remove that. So, you know, I could come in. Actually, one thing that's useful that I do in here sometimes is actually to tint my HDRIs, so that maybe I want a HDRI that's putting out a lot of pink or red or something. Maybe it's like a Mars scene and I want some sort of orange tinted HDRI. So I'll make one in here. Also, sometimes I don't want super crisp reflections on an object, so I might blur my HDRI. So add a blur in. And that kind of gives me, actually, let's see if there's any clamping. Don't have a clamp there. Color, I might be able to use like a curve to clamp those. Can't remember where. There is the ability to clamp stuff in here. Can't really remember how to do it. Mask. Yeah, I don't know. But you can see that's really blowing out when I blur. But that can be really, really handy to produce blurred reflections off a HDRI. You blur them in here. You can also do it in Nuke, which is probably, you know, what I would favor. But sometimes I'll do it in here just to be quick, and then you can write it out again. So ROP file output, and then just write that HDR out again. So that can be a really, really useful thing to do inside of here. If you don't have Photoshop or you don't have a Nuke, you can use that. Especially for HDRs, it's really good because it preserves, you know, that high dynamic range. So yeah, I mean, look, it's worth playing around with, I think. But as far as like high-end visual effects is concerned, this is just not really capable of you know, doing anything much more complicated than A over B. And yeah, it just is a little bit challenging to use. But I've used it. You know, you can definitely do it. So yeah, we're almost out of time, but if anyone has any other questions, any Nuke related questions or anything else, if anyone has any suggestions for what you might want to talk about next week, I can definitely pull in the Rebel Way stuff and just talk about, you know, various approaches to different effects, if that's something that people would be interested in. It's worth mentioning too, if you are interested in learning about compositing, we do have an introduction to Nuke at CG Spectrum. So that if that's something that you're interested in, then you could potentially look at taking that, where you will learn a lot of these kind of skills. And probably better than what I know how to do, because it's actually done by compositors who are, you know, proper compositors in the industry, not just effects artists using comp. But you might get to be mentored by one of these amazing comp mentors. So it's definitely worth taking a look at that if you're interested in in learning Nuke, or if you want to get into compositing as a career choice. I think in terms of, hey, no worries, old school Jack. Old school Jack. Thank you. No worries. Thanks for being here. I think if you want to get into the VFX industry, compositing is definitely probably the fastest way to get in. I think in terms of learning the software, Nuke is nowhere near as difficult and doesn't take as long to learn as Houdini does. It certainly, you know, takes a long time to master anything, but in terms of paths to industry, I think compositing is definitely an easier, faster path. Not that it's necessarily an easier job, because you still have the same kind of things that you will experience in any area of the pipeline you end up in with film. Certainly, there's always deadlines and things like that, and comp, because they're the ones that are touching the shot at the very end before it goes out to the client. They're the ones that, you know, have to deal with all the bringing everything together and making sure it's ready and on time, things like that. So it can be a very difficult, you know, difficult job, especially at the end of a project. But certainly, I think, yeah, if you're interested in getting into visual effects, then comp is definitely something worth looking at. And from my perspective as an effects artist and, you know, someone that hires effects artists, I really value nuke skills, and I will potentially choose somebody that has good nuke skills over somebody that doesn't, because it is something that I think is very important to being a well-rounded effects artist. So it's certainly something that you should learn, at least bare minimum, of how to put things together, because it can really help. So yeah, feel free, you know, any CGS Spectrum students that are with us. Roto artist inside me is crying right now. I think, yeah, look, I mean Roto is definitely. Are you? What do you do? What do you do your Roto for, Vishal? Certainly, Roto is one of the things that you'll be asked to do when you're a junior sort of compositing hire. That's probably one of the tasks that you will have to do a lot of. But it's all about stepping stones, and you know, you won't be given, if as an effects artist, you won't be given crazy amazing things to work on either when you start. But yeah, if anyone has any suggestions or requests for next week, any CG Spectrum students, you can always hit me up in Slack. But anyone else, then you can feel free to message on here next week or for the next couple of minutes. But I'll probably be working on the Rebel Way stuff, the Rebel Way Rookies Challenge, just bringing in those assets and talking about the different types of effects that you could do, and potentially just going through some of the ways that I might set some things up. I kind of comp is great, Vishal. I think it is really fun. Hey, no worries, Patrick. Have you ever assigned the task of animating camera? Do you think it is still needed to be learnt as an effects artist? Look, animating cameras doesn't really fall into the tasks of effects artists. Certainly in a film pipeline, all of that stuff is kind of handled by either animation or by MatchMove. MatchMove would be responsible for creating a camera from the footage, so that would be camera tracking. That's something I didn't look at this week, but maybe I can look at that at another session. So yeah, creating a camera from the footage, MatchMove would be. But if it was a digital shot, like this is, for example, it probably would fall to the animation department to create that camera, and not anyone else really. Occasionally, sometimes lighting might be involved in the creation of cameras, but certainly effects artists tend not to be. Usually, you know, film especially is very compartmentalized, so effects artists usually are just responsible for the effects only, and they're not typically great animators or have a feel for that stuff anyway, so it's good to sort of give that to the people that know how to animate and know how to set that stuff up. I think it's important to understand how 3D cameras work and how to create your own though, but you know, it's not necessarily a major part of working in VFX, in effects anyway. I hope that helps. All right, well, I think we're out of time, but thanks for joining me. I hope it's been useful information, and learn Nuke. Download the non-commercial version. On their website is very confusing, because when you go and look for their non-commercial version, there is a big bright try for free button at the top of the page, but that is not the thing that you want to click on. You scroll down and click on the get it now button or something. And that's how you get the non-commercial version, which it doesn't expire. The trial only lasts for 30 days. But yeah, if you're interested in learning Nuke, get the non-commercial version and just play around with it. It doesn't take that long to kind of learn the basics, but if you are interested in taking it further, then take a look at something like the introduction course that we offer. But thanks for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you guys next week.